So this little video is going to introduce you to RawProc. RawProc is a raw processing program that I wrote for my own use, and it does two things. First of all, it does my image processing quite nicely. Second, though, it really served as a learning platform for learning how image processing works, and I set it up to be that for anyone who would want to use it that way. What it does is allows you to open a raw file and step by step apply the tools that you want in the order that you want to process your image. You're going to see how that works here in just a little bit. What I want to do here first, though, is I want to give you a tour of the panes and menus so that you know a bit about how to use it before you dive into things. First of all, let's take a look at the panes. You'll notice there's a large black pane here. This is the this is where the image will be displayed as it's processed. In a bit, I'll show you how you can manipulate that so you can follow the progress of your image as you're working. Now, to the left of that, you'll see three panes. They each are appropriately titled with their purpose. The top pane is the important one. This is where tools will be assembled in an order to process the image. So we call this pane the tool chain pane. And so when I open an image, you'll notice that there will be a line added for the image file name. And then underneath that image file name, we'll start to stack tools. And it works in order from top to bottom. The first tool applied is the first tool added is the first tool applied. And then as you add tools, they are applied to the image in the order from top to bottom. Of note is that each tool will have its own copy of the image internally. So RawProc is really a pretty memory-intensive program. But what that lets you do, though, is it lets you efficiently select various tools for viewing and not have to worry about reprocessing all over again, because all it'll do is take the image, the result image for that tool, and blot it onto the screen for you. Moving down in the panes, the second one is going to be a histogram. It's a standard sort of a histogram as you've seen in other raw processors with some things that I'll show you when we open an image to work. And then finally, the parameters pane. When you select a tool from the tool chain, its parameters will be displayed here for you to consider and work with. So this is where, for a particular tool, you'll do the work to shape it to your needs. Now, across the top, we have RawProc's a menu-oriented program. So the menus look like standard GUI menus and are pretty well titled appropriately. So if we pull down the file menu, you've got an open. So you use this to open images. You can also open images by dragging them from your file explorer into RawProc. And I find that handy using an image viewer like Gkey, so that I can look at images in there that the raw previews provided, and I can take their icon, drag it into RawProc, and it opens up. Now, the next two tools, I'm going to skip reopen for a second, but I want to move to this tool here, open source. This is really the fundamental thing that I wrote RawProc to do, which was to store the processing that it took to get an image in that image, and then later on reopen that image, but have it, instead of opening the image itself, redo the processing. So what you would do with this tool is, after you had made an image and saved it in RawProc, you'd go and open the destination image, the JPEG or TIFF or whatever you created. And then what it would do is read the processing chain from that. And what it would do then is, instead of opening the TIFF or JPEG or PNG image, it would open the RAW and then reapply the processing. This is pretty powerful, I've found, for allowing you to to go and take a rendition that you did, open it up, and modify it and save it as a different rendition. Following that is a save. Notice there's no save or save as. Save actually works as a save as. I don't just save an image. Every time you hit the save menu item here, you are given a dialog box with which you can rename the file that you saved previously or what have you. So there's no save. It's all just save as. There's a standard exit button, works as you might figure. So let's move on down. In the edit menu, you can do cut, copy, and paste of tools in the tool chain. That's what those three commands are primarily. You can cut a tool out of the chain and paste it somewhere else in the chain. Now, the next item, properties, is very important. In fact, we're going to open that one and take a look. RawProc is a very configurable program, and all the configuration, all the changing that you can do to shape how RawProc works is contained in the properties. And it looks kind of like a properties window that you get with the browser. And I've got them named according to major and minor categories and so forth. You can filter the categories. For instance, if I wanted to see all of the parameters associated with JPEG, I'd type JPEG, and it would automatically filter, and notice that I've got both input and output parameters, and I can change those appropriately. I can kill that, and the full list comes back. Scrolling down, you see there's some small values. You also have some paths. There are some things like there's some tool chains. We'll talk about that later. Anyway, the entirety of configuring RawProc is done in the properties, which you can add to and delete from. And then if you want, you can dismiss the box. Although you can leave this box open and continue to work with RawProc. The only thing is that it floats on top, so you'll have to deal with that. We'll dismiss it for right now and continue working our way down the list. EXIF is a tool that will take Phil Harvey's EXIF tool program and run it against the image that's open and display the entirety of its output in a little dialog box. Can't demonstrate that right now. I don't have an image open. We'll do that later. Next menu item, data update, right now is only set up to update LensFun lens correction databases. But if you click that, that's what it will do. And I'll show you where you can tell what the state of that is in just a couple of minutes. Finally, the batch dialog allows you to take a RawProc tool chain and apply it to all the files in a directory. Here's the image command that you use. The term this is the shell that's used to run image. And then how you specify the input files and how you specify the output files. This dialog uses this program called image, which is a part of the RawProc distribution, to do batch processing using the tool chain that's given in this box. This is the subject of a separate video, so just wanted to show you that where it's set in the menu. You would change these parameters according to where things are located and how you wanted to process them. Hit the process button. It would kick off a copy of this WX command, which is a shell, which is really a separate program from RawProc. So you can kill RawProc once you start this off, and it'll continue to do its thing. But right now, we're just going to dismiss it. There's a separate video, like I said, to show you how to use the batch facility. Now, the add menu is really the heart of RawProc's processing. In the add menu, you will find all of the tools available to you to add in whatever sequence you want to the tool chain. You've got black white point. You've got demosaic. You can do lens correction. You can change and modify white balance. The tone tool it's a veritable zoo of tone tools to use and change in the tone mapping of your image. All of these are available for you to use to process not just raw files, but you can use this to process JPEGs or whatever if that is your inclination. All you do is open your image and start adding these one by one in whatever order you choose. For instance, if you wanted to resize an image, you could open a JPEG, and then the only tool you would need to add is resize. That's basically how RawProc works. Open an image, add tools, save it. Down at the bottom, there's a tool called Group. What you can do is you can make a group of tools into a single process. And what that does is it saves you some memory. Each time you add a tool to the tool chain, you're creating a copy of the image. That uses a lot of memory. And if you're memory constrained, you can group tools. Now, the grouping is not very fancy. You have to do it by hand. You can't select tools from a chain and group them, but it allows you to define groups that are applied in order. All the tools are applied in order, but they're all applied to a single copy of the image. And then finally, you can use tool list just to put tools in the chain according to a list. So that's the add menu. Finally, in the help menu, very important selection is called view help. This help file, I try to maintain, I try very studiously to maintain this file with the entirety of what it takes to use RawProc. So you notice you get a summary up here. It tells you a bit about what the libraries I use, what camera data I use. It's basically a credits page for all the things that I stole from someone else to put into RawProc. It's really a program built on the shoulders of giants. Of particular interest, if you open up image tools, you'll find you have a separate pane for each image, or a separate entry for each image tool with explanations on how they work. Important to getting started with using RawProc is the help topic title, How to Use RawProc. I'd strongly recommend that you start with this topic if you're going to use the program, because what it'll tell you here is Glenn Butcher's view on the important properties to set and how to set them in order to start using RawProc. Below that, it tells you basically how you use RawProc, what the battle rhythm is. And it's basically open an image, apply one or more tools, then save it. And it goes through some notions about that. Very important page to read through in the help file, with a lot of information on things like groups, color management, because RawProc does color management like everybody else does, but it does it by hand. You have every step you have to either add a profile to either assign it or convert it to the images in the image at some point in the tool chain. Anyway, help file, very important thing in order to learn to navigate RawProc. You can also, if you have an image open, if you applied a tool chain here, you can see the command that the tool chain builds with that menu item. And then the About box tells you how RawProc is constructed, its version, the libraries and their versions, what pixel format it's using, which is not as important now because I only really use just one. More importantly, it tells you where the configuration file is located. You can open RawProc from the command line and tell it to look for configuration files in different places, but there are defaults, and the help file talks about that. And then also, it tells you where your LensFun database is, the one that RawProc is using. And you'll notice that mine here is not current. If I were to go to the data update, and it would update. Now notice it's not updated here, but if I reopen the About box, it's now current. Then you also get the build date, so you know when I built it. So let's open an image to see what things are populated and how you would use them. So what I'm going to do is go to File, Open, and from here I'll select an appropriate raw file. Now, notice that when I open a raw file, that from this property in the Properties box, Input Raw Default. Input Raw Default is a very important property because it lets you define default processing. And this particular default processing is for my Nikon Z6. So you can do it by camera and do multiple defaults for however many cameras you want. And it's asking me, do I want to apply this tool chain to the raw file? And I'll say yes. So when I do that, notice you get a whole bunch of tools in the tool chain automatically. That's what the default processing was set to do. And it leaves you looking at the result of the final tool. And it shows you which tools are applied. You'll notice that that tool chain was a group, started with a group with these things, and then it followed with with a black-white point, and then a filmic curve. So now that we have the file open, you can see a histogram, and you'll see that its extent is display. With the D character on the keyboard, I can change that to data, in which case it's the same as display. But if I were making operations that extended the data past white, then selecting this would this option would would map the histogram to show all of the data. We'll leave it on display right now. And you'll notice that I can select tools here in the tool chain, and their parameters are loaded in the parameters pane. So for instance, I've selected the filmic tool, and you'll see my filmic tool has all sorts of different tone tools. What's selected right now is the filmic curve, which has 4 parameters that I won't bore you with right now, but the parameters I've selected apply this curve to the image. So whatever, for the tone tool, whatever curve you select, for instance, I would select double logistic, image got a little brighter. Notice the curve is different. This curve is plotted from an actual application of the tool in its parameters. So you always know what the curve looks like, and I find that very important, understanding tone mapping and raw processing, because if you don't understand the curve that's being applied, you don't know really what's going on with the image from what you're seeing mapped from what it was just before that. Notice when I select a group tool, I just get a list of all the things here, and I can edit these. So that's why I say you can edit by hand the group. It's not saved, though. It's just applied to this image. So going to the image pane, you'll notice you have a place to view it. If I double-click, I can toggle through the various scales. Right now, the image is scaled to fit the window. If I double-click, it goes to 100%. If I double-click again, I go back to fit. So I can double-click back and forth from 100% to fit here. I can also use the mouse wheel to roll in and out. And then if I come up to this pane here, this is a preview pane, that if I got a large magnification going here, I can follow where that is. And then I can also change it by dragging the little window down around within the preview window. Down at the bottom left, you have relevant information for the image. It's shutter speed, aperture, ISO, and the focal length of the lens. This can be changed in properties to do various things. Then we get to the bottom of the status bar. You notice I roll over the image. I have, in the bottom left, I have the coordinate that my mouse cursor is at, and then I have the RGB values, and then a calculated luminance value. Notice the RGB values are in floating point. That's because RawProc load, whatever file it loads, no matter what the incoming file format, it loads it into floating point numbers scale from 0 to 1. So that's what you're going to see at the in the status bar are the internal RawProc numbers for the various RGBs and the luminance. Okay, moving on down the status bar, you notice that these constitute modifications, so the image is marked modified. If I save it, this will go away and then stay gone until I do the next modification. Notice also now that we move on that the color management shows that we're using display 1. In RawProc, in the properties, you can specify display profiles for each of your displays. And if you designate them right, as I move RawProc from one display to another, the display profile will change to accommodate the appropriate display. So that's basically how RawProc works. Very important. Remember, properties are where you control it, and the help file is where you figure out what all these things mean. So have fun. Well, let's go on now to the next video where I'll show you how to process a raw file from scratch.